I read more than 100 books a year. Some in English, others in Spanish, French, Russian, German, Basque, Italian, Catalan, and in this video I'll tell you why and how I started reading again. Because not long ago I wasn't reading much. And I always liked reading. I grew up reading a lot of books. But then smartphones appeared and became a constant distraction. And at some point I realized I was wasting 3 or 4 hours a day on my phone. And most days I wasn't doing any reading at all. If you've tried both, you know the difference between how you feel after spending 20 minutes reading and wasting 20 minutes on your phone. Reading is good for you, but why read this much in the first place? Honestly, the simplest answer is that I enjoy it. But there are also some very practical benefits from reading a lot. First of all, when you read a book, you're getting years, sometimes decades, of someone's thinking, compressed into a few hours of your time. That's a really good deal. And unlike most content you consume online, a book has a structure. The author had to think hard about how the ideas connect, what to cut, what to keep, and that structure does something to your own thinking over time. And there's also the focus element. Reading requires sustained attention in a way that almost nothing else in modern life does. It's like it resets your brain. In a world full of distractions, sitting down and focusing on one thing at a time is something that most of us should do way more. It's almost like meditating. And for language learning, which is obviously a big part of my life, reading has also a lot of benefits, which I will talk about later in the video. So, how do I read? Well, the way I read depends entirely on what I'm reading. For non-fiction books I'm reading because I want to learn something and actually use it, I go fast. For novels or anything I'm reading for pleasure, I slow down and just enjoy it. I think a lot of people read everything the same way, and it doesn't really work because these are fundamentally different activities. So I treat them differently. When you're reading for learning, the foundation is reading speed. The average person reads at around 150 to 200 words per minute. I read 500 words a minute or more, depending on the language and how dense the material is. If you do a few speed reading courses, you can drastically increase how fast you read. I won't get into the details of how it works because that's a topic for a whole video by itself, but if you want to give it a try, look it up. There are apps and tools for training this. I'd recommend spending a few weeks deliberately pushing past your comfortable speed and then easing back. Your new baseline tends to settle higher than where you started. So when I sit down with a non-fiction book I want to properly learn from, I do it in 3 stages. The first thing I do is read a summary. The goal is to read the book already knowing the main ideas. That way, when I'm reading, I'm not building the structure from scratch. I'm filing in a framework I've already got. And then I speed read the book. And because you already know what you're going to read about, it's way easier to go really fast and still understand and retain the information. And then, as soon as I'm done, I do something with the information. I start applying it. Because when it comes to developing skills, you improve much faster by doing than by reading or watching videos about it. So I quickly read the book and start applying it immediately. If you have nothing you can use that information for, was it really worth reading? Unless you really enjoy it, of course. And pleasure reading is a completely different thing. It's also important, in my opinion, but I do it in a completely different way. I usually read to wind down and relax in the evenings, and also on weekends. I do this much more slowly than when I read for information. My default reading speed is still well above average because of the speed reading training, but I don't try to go fast. That defeats the purpose of reading to wind down and relax. I simply read at a speed that feels natural. Reading, real reading, sustained and focused, does the exact opposite of scrolling to your mental state. It's one of the best tools you have for actually switching off at the end of the day. One thing I do sometimes when I'm reading, particularly in a foreign language, is to read aloud. Not always, but often enough that it's become a habit. This has many benefits. You're not just using your eyes, you're also using your mouth and ears, because you're hearing yourself talk. So you're much more likely to retain what you read, the vocabulary, the sentence structures, and it's also a good way for your mouth to develop muscle memory, to work on your pronunciation in a new language, and overall to get comfortable with speaking. And the third thing I do is listening to audiobooks, which I use a lot. on walks, while driving, etc., but also while simply lying down and relaxing. I think audiobooks and long-form podcasts are way better for you compared to video content. And I say this as someone who makes YouTube videos. But overall, I think that good long-form content in the form of books, audiobooks, and podcasts is the antidote to dopamine addiction, fast-paced videos, doom scrolling, and all the anxiety and distraction that it generates. Not all short-form content is bad. The problem is often the task switching and the paradox of choice. You'll often spend more time looking for something to watch than actually watching it. And if you're watching shorter videos, you'll have to start looking for something to watch much more often, which means a lot more time wasted trying to decide what to spend your time watching. You don't have this problem if you're listening to a 20-hour audiobook, and you've got another 20-hour audiobook by the same author to listen to once you're done with this one. And the practical advantage of audio is that it doesn't compete with reading time. It runs in the background of your life, the hours that would otherwise be half empty anyway. It's not physical books versus audiobooks. It's both. One technique I use specifically with audiobooks is shadowing, listening and repeating simultaneously. When I shadow, I'm not just processing what I'm listening to. I'm training my mouth, my ear, my sense of rhythm, all at the same time. I'm internalizing how the language feels from the inside, the pacing, the intonation, the natural flow of it. I don't do this for entire audiobooks, of course. I do it in bursts, a few minutes at a time, here and there, when I want to shift from passive listening to something more active. But even in small doses, it's one of the most effective things I do for language learning. So at this point, you might be wondering, what do I actually read? And I'll tell you what I don't read. Those bestsellers that seem to get written by every influencer and political pundit these days, I avoid them like the plague. Famous face on the cover, one word title, 250 pages of filler that could have been a blog post. No thanks. What I actually enjoy reading is history books and novels. That's most of my reading. And I could lecture you on how learning history helps you understand the present and so on, but the reality of it is I read about the Roman Empire, World War II, and all those things because I find it really interesting and I enjoy it. So read about whatever you like. I do read ebooks, but I prefer paper, especially with older books. I like the texture and the smell of the pages. Yeah, it sounds like a cliche, I know. One of my favorite things when I travel is buying books in the local language, especially in France. I go there quite often and there are lots and lots of second-hand bookshops in France and you can find all kinds of old books there. I got a big pile of French books at home, from all my trips to the other side of the border. And when I find an author I really like, I read everything I can find from them. If something works, why change? Right now, I'm going through the whole list of audiobooks from an Italian historian called Alessandro Barbero about ancient and medieval history. Really interesting. Alright, so now I'm going to answer what a lot of you have been asking in the comment section. Is reading a good way to learn languages? How should you read in the language you're learning? Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you love reading and you're really interested in the culture behind the language you're learning, then yes, read a lot. If you're already at a B1 or B2 level and you want to push towards C1 and C2, extensive reading is one of the most effective things you can do. But if your goal is to learn a language from scratch and get conversational as quickly as possible, I wouldn't use books. The fastest path to speaking is not reading stories. It's learning your own sentences, the things you want to be able to say. So yes, you should read in the language, but you should read your own language islands. You build a small, personally relevant set of sentences, the things you'd actually say in real life, and you practice them until they completely internalized. Drill them over and over again, repeatedly, until they become automatic. If you do this with the right sentences, you can learn to speak any language really fast.